Joe Cirincione is on the line with us. He's the Distinguished Non-Resident Fellow at the Quincy Institute, former president of the Ploughshares Fund, national security analyst, author of 7 books, including Nuclear Nightmares, Securing the World Before It's Too Late, and Bomb Scare, The History and Future of Nuclear Weapons. He served on the International Security Advisory Board for Secretaries of State Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, and was an advisor to the presidential campaign of Barack Obama, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren. Quincy Institute, quincyinst.org is the website. His Twitter handle is Cirincione, Cirincione, with an at the beginning. Joe, welcome back. It's been quite some time since you've been on the program. I'm so glad you could make it.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Thom, and that is the most complete introduction I think I've ever had.
I want people to know who you are, because you're an impressive guy, and you've done some impressive stuff, and I have a lot of respect for your opinion, which is why I want to run some of these things past you. Let me just throw a couple of data points at you and get your response to them. The first is that the former foreign minister of Russia from 1990 to 1996, and a member of the Duma until 2000, Andrei Kozyriev, had a long tweet this weekend that I thought was absolutely fascinating. He was talking about, lots of discussion about how Putin is threatening nukes, and he says he sets up 3 predicates. He says, first of all, Putin has spent the last 20 years believing that Ukraine is not a real nation. Number 2, the Russian military. The Kremlin has spent 20 years trying to modernize its military, but so much of that money has been basically stolen by oligarchs, and Putin has no idea how bad his own military is to him because people are afraid to tell him the truth. And number 3, the West. Putin believed that Biden was morally incompetent, that the EU was weak because of how toothless the 2014 sanctions were, and then he watched the way that we withdrew from Afghanistan and figured, okay, this is going to be a cakewalk. I'm going to take on the West. I'm going to take on Ukraine. And he wraps this whole thing up by saying, essentially the bottom line is that, so in my opinion, Putin is a rational actor. Given that he is rational, I strongly believe he will not intentionally use nuclear weapons against the West. I say intentionally because indiscriminately shelling near a nuclear plant can cause an unintentional nuclear disaster. And he says, I'll take it a step further. The threat of nuclear war is another example of his rationality. The Kremlin knows it can try to extract concessions, whether from Ukraine or the West, by saber-rattling its last remaining card in the deck. The ultimate conclusion here is that the West should not agree to any unilateral concessions or limit its support of Ukraine too much for the fear of nuclear war. Now, at the same time, I'm understanding that Putin's negotiating stance has changed, and he said basically, if you recognize Crimea and Donbass, we will stop. So let me just dump all that in your lap and get your thoughts on all this, because it looks to me like we're looking at 1939 Germany all over again.
Well, there's lots of historical comparisons here. You could look at 1939 Poland. You could look at the Cuban Missile Crisis. You could look at the scares of the 1980s to see where we are. And you've heard the word unprecedented used a lot in this crisis, and that because so much of this is uncharted territory. We have never been here before. I mean, Putin made nuclear threats repeatedly against the West. Maybe it's this rational game playing that some believe. It's also part of Russian doctrine. Russian nuclear forces are intimately integrated into their Russian conventional doctrines. So, for example, Putin exercised 7 different nuclear-capable weapons in the exercises he conducted on Ukraine's border right before the invasion. So this is right there. I am very hesitant to embrace any analysis that says it's a bluff, that he won't do it, or that indicates that we can go ahead, for example, and intervene in the Ukrainian war because we can back Putin down. You do not want to roll the nuclear dice here. And there's several reasons for that. Let me just do 2 of them. One is that part of Russian strategy and U.S. strategy is what they call integrated deterrence. That is, that all the instruments of coercion, economic, conventional, cyber, nuclear, are all integrated into a joint sort of combat plan about how you would wage a war. Russia does it, we do it. So, and the theory is that will strengthen your deterrence. That will deter foes from engaging in conflict with you. Well, what the trouble is, once they do engage in conflict, as Putin is doing, then there really is the fire breaks between nuclear and conventional, or nuclear and cyber and conventional, are really blurred. And it becomes very easy to breach them in ways really that we haven't ever seen before, at least not since the 1950s and 60s. So here's Putin, who in the heat of battle, yes, he might decide that he needs to use a nuclear weapon to achieve his objectives. But there's another complication, which is in Russian doctrine, there's something called escalate to de-escalate. It's not clear that Putin believes in this. It's not clear it's integrated. But the theory goes, and Russians have written about it, that you would use a nuclear weapon first in a battle if you were losing the war. So if Putin starts to lose this war, something that was unimaginable a week ago, or it goes into an extended stalemate, or that he feels that the NATO and U.S. forces are going too far, then he would use a nuclear weapon first to signal the seriousness of his intent, to get the West to back off. And the argument goes it would be a small enough nuclear weapon, maybe half the size of a Hiroshima bomb, a tenth of the size, still much more powerful than any conceivable conventional explosive, still causing immense damage, but small enough that the West would back off. The trouble is, in any war game that we've played on this, once one side uses a nuclear weapon, the other side does not retreat. They feel they have to meet it in kind or even escalate in response. And like a gambler looking to who bets the house because he's losing at poker, you keep looking for that next move that you believe will be the decisive move. And in nuclear war games, what that means is the fight just escalates until everyone is throwing everything in and the game is over. So that's my concern about being a little too glib about nuclear use here.
Is there a dividing line, as it were, between strategic and tactical nukes? I mean, I think when we talk about nuclear war, the possibility of nuclear war, most Americans flash back to duck and cover and giant missiles coming and taking out New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. But in fact, it seems like what we're talking about are these battlefield nukes that Russia has hundreds of. We only have, I guess, fewer than 200 of them. And they're not, and ours are not as easily deployed, if what I'm reading is correct, and theirs are actually mobile on trucks and things. That, like you said, I mean, it could vaporize a city of 100,000 people, but are not something that is threatening Great Britain or the United States.
Well, it depends where you are, whether you think this is a tactical weapon or a strategic weapon. Right. The distinction is mainly in range, not in size. So the weapons that we have that we consider tactical, for example, we have something called the B-61 bomb. It's an airdrop bomb. We have about 100, 150 of those stored in Europe, but we have hundreds more at home. So there is no – Russia does not enjoy any kind of advantage in tactical nuclear weapons. They tend to have more of them. They just haven't disassembled them from the Cold War. They have a couple of thousand, we believe, in storage. But, once you go past – use of a few nuclear weapons, it really doesn't matter anymore. There's no numerical advantage here. So those tend to be about 150 kilotons. That's 10 times the size of Hiroshima. But they're a dial a yield, so you can dial them down. And this has been sort of the fad in nuclear policy in the last 10 years, both in the United States and in Russia, of going for new, more usable nuclear weapons. Some in our military feel that we are self-deterred from using nuclear weapons. If we have this powerful weapon, why don't we use it? Well, they're too big.
Right.
So let's dial them down. Joe, bring them down to like a half a kiloton, still 1,000 tons of destructive force. But that would be something we could use and might be able to get away with it.
I get it. Joe, we're 90 seconds away from a hard break I can't control. Should we be considering accepting Russia's nuclear or bargaining position and basically giving them a chunk of Ukraine? Will Ukraine go along with it? What's the best way to resolve this?
No one knows how this conflict is going to end. It's very difficult to see either side prevailing militarily. So you have to be looking for a diplomatic off-ramp. That means compromise. That probably means Ukraine agreeing to some of Putin's territorial demands, however odious they might be.
Although he's also demanding that they agree never to join NATO or the European Union.
Well, that never is a long time, but that is what he's looking for. Neutral Ukraine, Crimea annexed to Russia, the republics in the Donbass region either joining Russia or being independent. Yes, those are his core demands. I don't think Ukraine is in any mood to agree to any of them right now. That may change as the
do you think it's possible
brutal
that
occupation continues.
Do you think it's possible that Ukraine could actually beat the Russian military, or do you think at the point that looks like it's going to happen, Putin's going to roll out the nukes?
I don't think there is a winning military hand here for Putin. Even if he pummels the cities and occupies the territory, he can't sustain it. It'll be his Afghanistan.
Wow. Well, yeah, I think that's increasingly apparent. It's remarkable. Joe Cirincione, non-resident fellow at the Quincy Institute, author of numerous books, most recently Nuclear Nightmares. Cirincione on Twitter. Joe, thanks so much for dropping by. It's always...
Thank you, Thom.
Thank you. Always great and very useful to get your input. Thank you.